On July 18th of 2018, one of the most influential trades in NBA history took place, as Kawhi Leonard, along with Danny Green, were traded from the San Antonio Spurs to the Toronto Raptors in exchange for DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl. This came after months of drama surrounding Kawhi and the Spurs, where it was reported in June of that year that he had requested a trade. This drama came due to tensions surrounding the rehabilitation process of Kawhi's injuries, where many members of the team thought he was faking the injuries and wanted him to return sooner, which he declined to do and ended up staying out much of 2018 season. With that being said, regardless of what caused the trade involving Kawhi and Raptors star DeMar DeRozan, by the end of the next season, it became very clear who won the trade between the two teams. As most people know, the trade turned out almost as well as it could have for the Toronto Raptors, as on October 17th of 2018, Kawhi made his debut for the Raptors, scoring 24 points and having 12 rebounds. And this was just the start of the journey Kawhi led the Raptors on, as with the season continuing, he became more comfortable with the team and the results were only getting better. As the season went on, it also became more clear to many viewers that the Toronto Raptors might actually be series championship contenders that year, although it was still unlikely they would beat the Golden State Warriors coming out of the West. As the regular season concluded, the Raptors did indeed make the playoffs, finishing with a record of 58 wins and 24 losses, while clinching the second seed in the Eastern Conference only behind the Milwaukee Bucks. Going to the postseason now, the Toronto Raptors led by superstar Kawhi would still have an uphill battle to face, as they still need to beat challenging Eastern Conference teams such as the 76ers and the Bucks to even get a shot at the NBA title. The first round went relatively easy for the Raptors as they beat the Orlando Magic in a 5-game series. But the next series against the 76ers is when the championship run really became difficult for the Toronto Raptors and Kawhi. As after 6 games of back-and-forth basketball, the 76ers and the Raptors were all tied up 3-3 in the series, which meant the Raptors were headed back home for Game 7. And assuming we have all watched that crazy Game 7, we would have witnessed one of the most important shots in recent NBA history. That being when Kawhi Leonard shot a buzzer-beater shot that rolled around the rim and ended up sending the Toronto Raptors to the Eastern Conference Finals. And if it wasn't clear before, the specific moment made it very evident that the Raptors was now Kawhi's team. And if they did end up winning a championship that year, it would be because of him. The next series for the Raptors was slightly less eventful, as after losing the first 2 games of the series to Giannis and the Bucks, Kawhi and the Raptors won 4 straight in order to book themselves a spot in the NBA Finals. And it was at this point where the Raptors fans and the rest of the NBA started thinking about how the possibility of the Toronto Raptors winning their first NBA championship might actually be realistic. In terms of the NBA Finals, if we talked about every factor that affected the outcome, we would be here a while. So instead, I'm just going to summarize things. First off, Curry and Klay shot poorly in the first few games for the Warriors, and their best playoff performer in Kevin Durant ended up injured, missing most of the finals. But at the end of the day, regardless of all the injuries and burdens holding the Golden State Warriors back that series, the Toronto Raptors went on to win the NBA Finals in 6 games, with Kawhi being named Finals MVP. And this championship on the back of Kawhi erupted the city of Toronto as they had parades and celebrations for days in order to document this monumental occasion for the city. However, the summary of the Raptors' great 2018-2019 NBA season was just an introduction to the main purpose of this video. There's no denying that the NBA championship wouldn't be in Toronto today if Kawhi Leonard didn't end up in Toronto. But it is also important to remember that Kawhi didn't win the championship by himself, as all other members of the team played their roles to a high level. One of the most important roles being played by Pascal Siakam, who played second fiddle to Kawhi during the Raptors' playoff run, as Pascal averaged both the second most points and rebounds throughout the playoffs for the Raptors and picked up for Kawhi whenever he was having an off night. But this playoff performance wasn't out of the blue for Pascal, as that regular season had been a breakout one for him as well, with him averaging 17 points and 7 rebounds while not even being one of the top 2 options on the team. This being a season that ended up winning him Most Improved Player at the end of the season. And looking back at it now, with how challenging NBA players were for the Toronto Raptors, many say that the championship wouldn't have been possible without the leap that Pascal took that season, becoming a legitimate star player in the NBA. Now, let's link this all back to the main purpose of the video, and the very first thing talked about, the trade that started it all. But rather than looking at Kawhi and how impactful he was in the trade, we're going to look at Pascal's role in the trade, which is kind of odd considering that he wasn't actually traded. But what if I were to tell you that there's a world not too far away where Pascal Siakam could have been in the San Antonio Spurs right now with DeMar DeRozan? And to look at that possibility, we must first look at the most relevant part of the trade, which was Jakob Poeltl. And to give a little background, Jakob Poeltl is a center out of Utah who the Raptors took with the 9th overall pick in the 2016 NBA draft, the same draft in which they later took Pascal Siakam with the 27th overall pick. And coming out of the draft, Poeltl was actually a higher rated prospect than Siakam, and the Raptors were planning to have him develop behind Valanciunas before he could eventually take over the starting job. However, throughout his years in Toronto, Poeltl wasn't appearing as a future starting center in the NBA, as he averaged only 3 points and 3 rebounds in his first season. However, his sophomore season, which was the year before the trade, he started showing some flashes, although it was clear that his skills were still raw. Poto went on to average 7 points and 5 rebounds that season, along with 1.2 blocks per game, which was his most shining attribute. Now, it's also important to note that during this time, Pascal was developing at the same sort of rate, where he was showing flashes but nothing to go crazy about. In fact, in his sophomore year, he averaged almost identical numbers as Jakob Poeltl, with 7 points and 5 rebounds, except Pascal did this with slightly more minutes per game and slightly fewer blocks. So from first glance, it would seem that Jakob Poeltl was actually the more promising player at this point. And this is important in realizing why Poeltl was shipped to the Spurs in the first place, as when the Spurs started negotiations with the Raptors for Kawhi, it was clear to both sides that DeMar DeRozan would not be enough in return for a superstar like Kawhi, who was in the prime of their career. And with that being known, the Spurs made it evident that in return, the Raptors would also have to give up one of the young prospects in order to make it worth it. And because the Spurs had the upper hand in the trade talks, the Spurs essentially got their choice between Jakob Poeltl and Pascal Siakam. And as we now know, they chose Poeltl. And they would choose Poeltl with the belief that he would end up being a better player than Pascal and developing better. And that's where they were wrong. Because now that things have settled down from the trade, it is clear that the Spurs picked the wrong player. As it is now clear that even with the change of team, Jakob Poeltl is likely to never be anything more than a role player off the bench, whereas Pascal Siakam is now the number one option on his team and has just been selected to his first All-Star game. And even when looking at the stats, the mistake made by the Spurs becomes even more clear, as Poeltl averaged 6 points per game and 5 rebounds, while receiving even fewer minutes than what he got on the Toronto Raptors. Whereas Pascal, on the other hand, is now the main man in Toronto now that Kawhi has left, and is averaging 24 points per game with 8 rebounds and 4 assists. And to think that Pascal could have very easily ended up in San Antonio with Greg Popovich and all those developmental coaches, but instead, they chose Jakob Poeltl instead. However, with that being said, all of this brings us back to the question of what would have happened if Pascal had indeed been traded to the Spurs in exchange for Kawhi. For starters, with the impact that Pascal had last season for the Raptors, many would say that Kawhi alone wouldn't have been able to take out the 76ers, Bucks, and Warriors in the playoffs, which in my opinion is a fair argument. But even further than that, I think the biggest impact would have came after the championship, as the one negative about trading for Kawhi was that he decided to leave after 1 year and join the LA Clippers. And one thing I can almost say for certain is that the Raptors would not be in the position they are today if they had traded Pascal a year ago. Because post-Kawhi, Pascal has really come into his own and is now even leading the Raptors team as I mentioned earlier. Not only is he leading them, but before the season was put on hold, he was leading them to a 46-18 record, which once again puts them as the second best team in the East. And at first glance, this might not seem like much because it actually is what they accomplished last year. But you have to remember that this is after they lost the Finals MVP and their only superstar caliber player in Kawhi. A loss so noticeable that some were predicting that the Raptors wouldn't even make the playoffs this year, and definitely had no chance of making it a deep playoff run again. And although it would be unfair to claim Pascal was doing it all by himself, I think it would be safe to say that they wouldn't be in the position they are if he was no longer on the team. Now, in terms of the San Antonio Spurs, it is interesting to imagine where they would be today if they had indeed traded for Pascal Siakam back in 2018. And although I don't like to make many assumptions, I would like to think that a core four of DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge, Pascal Siakam, and DeJounte Murray would almost for sure make the playoffs, which is something that is currently looking unlikely for the Spurs right now. And I think I could even go as far as to say that they could actually make a playoff run in the West, as Siakam had continued on with his development, which is also not something that they have done recently, as they haven't made it out of the first round of the playoffs since Kawhi stopped playing for them back in 2018. To conclude, I just want to emphasize that this is all based on hypotheticals, and there's no way of truly knowing whether or not the Raptors would have won that championship without Pascal, or maybe even any of their other players for that matter of fact. There's also no way of knowing whether or not Pascal would have seen the same level of development if he had been traded back in 2018, because although the Spurs do have a good coaching staff, it has also been clear through the years that Pascal's development does come down to a lot of what the team does and the coaching staff. But even with all that being hypotheticals, with the Kawhi trade resulting in such big results, it is interesting to think about if things would have been different, if what seemed like such a minor detail of the trade had been different. But with all that being said, please like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what your opinions on the situation are, and whether or not you think Pascal is really that crucial of an asset in the NBA and to the Toronto Raptors. Anyways, it's been BTG, and I'll see you next time when we talk more all about the game.